The Galactic Council's first contact protocols were precise, methodical, and had worked flawlessly for over 10,000 years, until they met humans. Supreme Diplomat Vexera of the Unified Systems stood before the emergency session of the Council, their bioluminescent patterns betraying their agitation. The holoscreen behind them displayed footage that had every representative in the chamber shifting uncomfortably in their seats. As you can see, Vexera's translator conveyed, their patterns pulsing with what could only be described as existential dread. The human vessel's response to the Drachnid incursion defied all established protocols. The footage showed a small human exploration vessel, the ESS Armstrong, surrounded by 3 Drachnid raiders. By all standard metrics, the situation should have resulted in a routine surrender following Form 7B of the Interstellar Combat Guidelines. Instead, the Armstrong's captain had done something that caused several of the Council's military advisors to emit stress pheromones. The human vessel had deliberately vented its atmosphere, using the expelled gas as a makeshift thruster to execute what their logs described as a drift maneuver, while simultaneously broadcasting what they called Tokyo Drift over all emergency frequencies. The humans, Vexera continued, their patterns now showing signs of genuine distress, refer to this as improvising. Our linguistic experts are still debating whether this should be classified as a combat technique or a form of performance art. The footage continued, showing the Armstrong spinning through space in ways that made several of the Council's physics experts request immediate stress leave. The human vessel had somehow converted their cargo of industrial lubricant into an improvised weapon, creating what the captain's log enthusiastically described as space caltrops. We must also address, Vexera added, their patterns now displaying the universal indicator for severe bureaucratic anxiety, the human crew's apparent emotional state during this encounter. The Council chamber fell silent as the internal audio recordings played. Instead of displaying the appropriate level of terror, the human crew could be heard laughing. One officer had even described the experience as better than that time we went skydiving into a hurricane. Our psychological experts, Vexera noted, their patterns now showing signs of impending molt, have suggested that humans may actually enjoy combat situations. The footage concluded with the Armstrong successfully evading capture, leaving behind 3 Drachnid vessels, tangled in industrial lubricant, and a very confused pirate fleet, attempting to file incident reports that their systems repeatedly rejected as incomprehensible. An Arxian representative raised their sensory stock. Perhaps we should consider that our combat protocols, developed over millennia of civilized warfare, might not be compatible with human methodology. Vexera's patterns flickered with what their species used for ironic amusement. Their official after-action report cites winging it, getting creative, and that cool scene from that old movie as tactical decisions. The Council chamber erupted into concerned murmuring. Several species representatives were already drafting emergency proposals to update the Interstellar Combat Guidelines. Others were simply trying to process the fact that humans had effectively turned a routine piracy incident into what one observer had termed a physics-defying dance party. There is one more thing, Vexera added, their patterns now showing the rare combination of fascination and horror. When asked about their unusual tactics, the human captain simply shrugged and said, "Sometimes you gotta think outside the box." The Council took an immediate recess as several members needed to consult their species' equivalent of philosophical counselors. The humans, meanwhile, had already filed their incident report, complete with helpful diagrams drawn in what appeared to be digital crayon, and requested permission to try that cool spin move again during their next training exercise. As the Council members filed out of the chamber, one truth had become crystalline clear. The galaxy's carefully constructed protocols for civilized warfare had not prepared them for humanity's particular brand of creative problem-solving. And somewhere out there, a human crew was probably already figuring out how to weaponize that fact. The Galactic Military Analysis Center, was experiencing what humans might call a collective nervous breakdown. Grand Strategist Kvorn of the Unified Military Command stood before a wall of holographic displays, each showing different instances of human combat tactics that defied every principle of conventional warfare. "These are not soldiers," Kvorn declared, their crystalline exoskeleton vibrating with frustrated confusion. "These are artists of chaos." The assembled analysts watched as footage from 17 different encounters played simultaneously. In one, a human mining vessel had escaped a military blockade by reconfiguring their drilling equipment into what they called a makeshift disco ball of doom. In another, a small human scout ship had evaded capture by convincing their pursuers that they were actually filming a reality show. "Look at this," Kvorn gestured to a particularly disturbing recording. This human vessel was surrounded by a hive mind battle fleet. Standard doctrine calls for immediate surrender. Instead, the strategist paused, checking their notes. They'd rickrolled the entire enemy fleet. Several junior analysts had to excuse themselves as the footage showed the human ship broadcasting an ancient Earth video transmission that had somehow managed to crash the hive mind's collective consciousness for a full 3 minutes. "Their combat doctrine," continued a quantum intelligence specialist, their probability matrices visibly distressed, "appears to be based on something they call vibing. We have spent the last 3 solar cycles attempting to quantify this concept. So far, we have determined that it involves equal parts tactical genius and what humans refer to as doing it for the memes." The holographic displays shifted to show a comprehensive analysis of human battle strategies. The chart was mostly filled with question marks and expressions of existential doubt. "Traditional military analysis relies on identifying patterns," Kvorn explained, their crystalline structure now showing stress fractures. "The humans have turned the absence of pattern into a pattern. They have weaponized unpredictability itself." A particularly concerning piece of footage began playing, showing a human diplomatic vessel evading capture by executing what their captain had described as "that cool thing I saw in a video game once." The maneuver had violated 13 different laws of physics and had caused 3 separate alien species to revise their understanding of spatial dynamics. "We have also discovered," added a cultural analysis expert, their tentacles tied in anxious knots, "that humans have an alarming tendency to name their military operations after food items or popular entertainment references. The psychological warfare implications alone are staggering." The assembled analysts watched in horror as a database of human operation names scrolled past. Operation Pizza Time, the Big Whopper Gambit, Tactical Spaghetti Incident, and perhaps most disturbingly, the UNO Reverse Card Protocol. "But surely," suggested a newly appointed analyst, their optimism not yet crushed by exposure to human warfare tactics, "we can at least categorize their weapon systems." Kvorn's crystalline form darkened with what might have been pity. "Yesterday, a human vessel successfully defended itself using nothing but expired food products and what they called sick beats. Their engineer apparently quoted something called MacGyver and proceeded to turn their waste recycling system into what they termed a party cannon." The room fell silent as this information was processed. Several analysts began updating their theoretical frameworks to include literally anything as a potential human weapon. "There is one more concerning development," Kvorn added, their voice modulator dropping to a whisper. "We have intercepted human military communications, indicating that they consider our attempts to analyze their tactics admirable." The implications of this statement sent shockwaves through the analysis center. The idea that humans not only recognized the galaxy's attempts to understand their methods, but found them entertaining added an entirely new layer of complexity to the situation. In conclusion, Kvorn summarized, their crystalline form now showing the telltale signs of impending professional crisis. "Human combat doctrine appears to be based on 3 primary principles. First, if it exists, it can be weaponized. Second, the more absurd a solution appears, the more likely they are to attempt it. And third," they paused, their voice modulator crackling with disbelief. They seemed to be genuinely enjoying themselves. As the briefing concluded, a new alert flashed across the holographic displays. Somewhere in the galaxy, a human vessel was attempting what their crew had dubbed Operation Leroy Jenkins. The analysis center immediately went into emergency session, even as several staff members quietly admitted that they were beginning to understand why the humans found all of this so amusing. The Valhar Empire had conquered 17 star systems through perfect military precision. Their battle formations were immaculate, their strategies refined over centuries of warfare. They were, by all conventional metrics, the most formidable military force in their sector of the galaxy. Then they encountered humans. High Commander Vexthar of the Valhar Imperial Fleet stood on the bridge of their flagship, the inevitable victory, watching with increasing concern as their perfect battle formation dissolved into what one junior officer had termed a cosmic comedy of errors. "They're doing it wrong," Vexthar announced, their armored carapace clicking with agitation. "They're doing everything wrong. How are they winning?" The human fleet before them consisted of an eclectic mix of vessels that, according to all proper military doctrine, shouldn't even be in the same battle group. Their formation appeared to be based on what their communications described as, "that one time we played space frisbee with asteroids." "Sir," reported the tactical officer, their mandibles trembling, "the humans are. They're broadcasting music." Through the command center speakers came the thundering beats of what human archives identified as classical rock music. Several Valhar officers instinctively began tapping their appendages to the rhythm, much to their horror. "The humans call this setting the mood," the cultural advisor offered helpfully, before being silenced by Vexthar's glare. The situation deteriorated further when the human vessels began executing what their commanders cheerfully termed the greatest hits of human warfare. One ship performed what they called a barrel roll. Despite the complete lack of tactical advantage such a maneuver should provide, another vessel was using its tractor beams to play what they described as cosmic ping-pong with disabled Valhar drones. "They're not following any of the proper protocols." Vexthar's exasperation peaked as they watched a human corvette use a damaged section of their own hull as an improvised skateboard through space. "Where are their formal battle declarations? Their standardized attack patterns?" The answer came in the form of a transmission from the human flagship, the inappropriately named "Hold My Beer." "Hey there." The human admiral's casual greeting caused several Valhar communication officers to faint. "Just wondering if you folks have ever heard of the Odysseus Gambit." Before Vexthar could consult their tactical database, 3 human cargo ships that had been playing dead suddenly activated, revealing themselves to be packed with what humans called party poppers, harmless but incredibly disorienting devices that filled local space with colorful particles and confetti. "This is a violation of every combat convention." Vexthar roared as their sensors were blinded by the celebratory chaos. "War is not supposed to be fun." "That's where you're wrong, buddy," came the human response, accompanied by what their databases identified as a winking emoji. "Everything can be fun if you have the right attitude." The Valhar fleet's perfect formation had devolved into complete disarray. Some ships were tangled in streams of festive ribbons. Others were being herded like cosmic cattle by human vessels performing elaborate aerobatic maneuvers, and at least one Valhar cruiser had somehow been convinced to join what the humans called a conga line. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, their professional demeanor cracking, "the humans are now rating our ship's evasive maneuvers on a scale of 1 to 10 and offering helpful tips for improvement." The final straw came when the humans began using their communication channels to take song requests from the increasingly entertained Valhar crew members. When Vexthar heard their own gunners humming along to something called "Another One Bites the Dust," they knew the battle was lost. "This is High Commander Vexthar," they announced over the fleet-wide channel, their voice heavy with the weight of shattered military tradition. "We are initiating a tactical retreat. Not because we are defeated, but because we clearly are not prepared for whatever this is." As the Valhar fleet attempted to withdraw in what remained of their dignity, they received one final transmission from the human admiral. Great practice session, everyone. Same time next week. We can workshop some new moves. The Valhar Empire's after-action report was the shortest in their 1,000-year history. Humans do not fight wars. They choreograph them. The galaxy was not ready. In the weeks that followed, the Valhar Military Academy reluctantly added a new course to their curriculum. Understanding Human Combat Philosophy. When Chaos Becomes Art. The course had a 3-year waiting list within days and featured what would become an infamous final exam question. Explain why humans believe that every battle should have its own soundtrack. Meanwhile, somewhere in human space, a captain was already planning what they called Operation Dance Dance Revolution, much to the growing concern of every military strategist in the galaxy. The Galactic Military Integration Committee was experiencing what their medical staff had diagnosed as collective administrative. The Galactic Military Integration Committee was experiencing what their medical staff had diagnosed as collective administrative trauma. The chamber, normally a model of interstellar bureaucratic efficiency, had descended into what one human observer had cheerfully termed organized panic. Chief Administrator Zixtal, their bioluminescent patterns displaying what experts recognized as severe procedural distress, stood before the assembled representatives of 37 spacefaring civilizations. The holographic display behind them showed their 7th attempt at creating a standardized framework for incorporating human military units into the Galactic Defense Force. Perhaps, Zixtal suggested, their voice modulator struggling to maintain professional composure, if we simply created a new classification category called Human Tactics and listed everything under it as pending review. The suggestion caused several documentation specialists to emit stress pheromones. A Quantarian representative raised their probability appendage. We've analyzed 2,749 documented instances of human military engagement. The only consistent pattern we've identified is their consistent refusal to follow patterns. The holographic display shifted to show the latest incident that had thrown the committee into disarray. A joint training exercise between human forces and the Arcturian Defense Fleet had gone sideways. Literally, the humans had somehow convinced the entire Arcturian battle group to participate in what they called a space flash mob. The humans insist, reported the training standards officer, their crystalline form showing visible cracks, that boosting morale is a valid tactical objective. They've submitted a request to classify good vibes as a strategic resource. The chamber erupted into confused discussions. Several species had to have the concept of vibes explained to them, leading to 3 separate philosophical crises and 1 spontaneous religious awakening. We must address, Zixtal continued, their patterns now showing signs of impending bureaucratic meltdown, their proposed modifications to our standard combat protocols. The display showed the humans' suggested revisions to the Galactic Military Code. They had apparently annotated the 1,000-page document with what they called life hacks and pro-gamer moves. One section had been entirely replaced with a collection of what they termed epic gamer moments. Their latest proposal, Zixtal announced, causing several administrators to activate their calming fields, suggests incorporating something called YouTube tutorial energy into our tactical training programs. A mechanoid representative's logic circuits temporarily shut down when they attempted to process a human officer's explanation that sometimes you just gotta freestyle it. The concept of freestyling military operations had caused a minor revolution in their binary society. We have also received, added the cultural integration officer, their tentacles tied in regulatory knots, 17 different requests to add what humans call boss music to our standard combat procedures. They insist it's essential for setting the proper mood. The committee watched in bewildered fascination as footage showed a human fleet engaging in what their commanders had dubbed Operation Beat Drop. The coordinated attack pattern perfectly synchronized with something called dubstep, causing several music theorists to question their understanding of combat dynamics. There is also the matter, Zixtal noted, their patterns displaying rare signs of bureaucratic amusement, of their proposed Uno reverse card protocol for responding to surprise attacks. The chamber fell silent as they contemplated the implications. The humans had somehow managed to turn a children's card game into a legitimate military strategy, complete with color-coded response scenarios and what they called epic comeback moments. Perhaps, suggested a newly appointed committee member, their optimism not yet crushed by exposure to human organizational methods, we could create a separate subsection for human-specific protocols. We tried. Zixtal responded, their patterns flickering with remembered frustration. The humans submitted their section under the title, Hold My Beer and Watch This. It included procedures for converting maintenance drones into what they called space DG booths. As if to emphasize the point, the display showed footage of a recent joint patrol, where human ships had turned a routine surveillance mission into what their logs described as a cosmic rave with strategic significance. The humans, concluded Zixtal, their patterns now showing a complex mix of resignation and fascination, have requested that we add style points to our combat effectiveness metrics. They argue that, and I quote, "If you're going to save the galaxy, you might as well look cool doing it." The committee took an emergency recess as several members needed to consult their species equivalent of entertainment industry professionals to understand the concept of looking cool. Meanwhile, in orbit above, a human training officer was already organizing what they called Operation Dance Dance Revolution. Tactical edition, much to the equal parts horror and intrigue of their alien counterparts. The Omega-class threat emerged from deep space without warning. The Destruct Swarm, a civilization of self-replicating machines that had consumed 12 galaxies, arrived at the edges of known space. They were perfect, predictable, and utterly unstoppable. Until they met humanity. Grand Admiral Xilax of the Combined Galactic Forces stood in the Emergency Command Center, watching as every carefully crafted defense plan failed against the mechanical onslaught. The swarm calculated every possible response, countered every traditional strategy, and methodically dismantled the most sophisticated military formations in the galaxy. All conventional options have been exhausted. Xilax announced to the assembled War Council, their crystalline form dim with despair. The swarm's predictive algorithms account for every standard combat protocol in our database. That's when the human representative, Admiral Sarah Chen, smiled. It was the kind of smile that had, over the past few years, come to both terrify and fascinate the galactic community. "Good thing we don't do conventional," she said, activating her holographic display. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all configurations, let me introduce you to what we call Operation Chaos Theory." The plan she presented was, by all standard military metrics, insane. It involved converting entertainment satellites into what humans called space disco balls, reprogramming maintenance bots to perform synchronized dance routines, and turning the entire defensive grid into what they termed the universe's biggest game of musical chairs. The swarm operates on perfect logic, Chen explained, her enthusiasm causing several alien officers to activate their anxiety suppressors. So let's show them something perfectly illogical. The combined fleet watched in stunned amazement as human ships began executing maneuvers that seemed to be choreographed by a mad genius. They turned battle formations into dance patterns, used debris fields for what they called cosmic parkour, and broadcast a mixture of classical music and something called heavy metal on all frequencies. The swarm's predictive algorithms began to fail. Their perfect calculations couldn't account for ships that treated space combat like a music festival. Their strategic models crashed trying to predict tactics based on what humans called the rule of cool. They're attempting to calculate the tactical advantage of our movements, Chen reported gleefully, watching the swarm's formations falter. But there isn't one. We're just vibing. The mechanical hive mind, faced with combat decisions that defied every principle of logic, began to experience what could only be described as a collective existential crisis. Their ships, unable to process the concept of freestyle combat, started to display signs of mechanical confusion. "Now," Chen announced, her grin widening, "let's show them why humans never skip leg day." What followed would be remembered in galactic history as the Great Space Rave of Victory. Human ships led the combined fleet in maneuvers based on everything from ballet to breakdancing. They turned tactical retreats into conga lines and defensive formations into synchronized swimming patterns. The swarm, their logical processors overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of what they were witnessing, began to experience cascading system failures. Their perfect prediction matrices shattered against the unpredictable chaos of human creativity. As the mechanical threat gradually collapsed under the weight of its own confused calculations, Hylax turned to Chen with new understanding. "This was your advantage all along, wasn't it? Not your technology, not your numbers, but your ability to turn warfare into art." "Life's a dance," Chen responded, watching as her fleet executed what they called a grand final maneuver that somehow involved turning a debris field into a temporary light show. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow, and sometimes you just have to make up the steps as you go along. In the aftermath of what would become known as the Battle of Infinite Improbability, the galactic community finally understood. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their ability to break the rules. It was their ability to prove that sometimes the rules themselves were the greatest limitation. The Galactic Military Code was subsequently revised to include a new section titled Human Tactical Doctrine. It contained only one line: "Expect the unexpected, and when in doubt, dance it out." Somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the remnants of the Destruct Swarm were still trying to calculate the strategic value of a moonwalk in zero gravity. They would be processing that query for millennia to come. Meanwhile, humanity had already begun planning their next great innovation, Operation Space Eurovision. The galaxy collectively decided that some things were better left as surprises.